Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't need any rocket science to realize that we are in a crisis as a country. And even a blind person will see that Kenya is in economic and political turmoil that needs to be resolved. I have seen a lot of chest thumping between the ODM leadership, the Azimio leadership, and the Kenya Kwanza leadership. Both sides are really chest thumping and they want to outdo each other. Superiority battle to see who is the mightier between them. Something that does not augur well with the common citizen who is really suffering. Both the leaders have taken to media stations, they have taken to meetings, they have taken to their social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter just to show their position. The Kenya Kwanza team, for example, does not want to accept that there is a crisis and that Olusegun Obasanjo is in the country ready to act as a neutral arbiter. And the Azimio fraternity says that there is a crisis and they are ready for talks that will benefit the common mwananchi. One of the people who weighed in this discussion very vehemently is the Chief Minister, Musalia Mudavadi. And Musalia believes that everything is normal, there is no crisis, and we don't need to talk because according to him, mbele iko sawa. They are in the steering and they believe that Kenya is headed in the right direction. On his Twitter handle, Musalia Mudavadi a few hours ago said that Kenya is not in an international crisis. The opposition should not internationalize their losses. We have to prosecute our affairs as one people. I absolutely concur with Musalia Mudavadi that we need to prosecute our affairs as a country, as a nation, as one people. But I disagree when Musalia Mudavadi believes that there is no crisis. Who is internationalizing this Kenyan crisis? It is themselves. I remember the first time when Raila started the demonstrations, the government wrote a letter to the international community, to the diplomats, that Raila Odinga was hell-bent and had an idea of toppling a legitimately elected government. They are the first people who took Raila to the international community. They even invited Chris Coons to come here and try to talk to Raila Odinga. Recently, the international community and all the diplomats, thronged Kalonzo's current home, and they wanted Kalonzo to try and talk to Raila to tone down the rhetorics, to call off the demonstrations. And I think the international community has succeeded in this. So Musalia should not tell us that it is the Azimio that is internationalizing the crisis. It is the government that is doing this. And the reason why Musalia Mudavadi is talking like this is because, one, Musalia believes that when people engage in talks, because the crisis that we find ourselves in is both political and social. And so when people get to serious talks, there are things like scrutinizing the server, revisiting our constitution, and I have seen a common goal that people might go the BBI way, because even that position is in question. I've also seen one of the demands that if they will get to talks, then they are going to talk about interference with the coalition parties. Stop buying members. And I will tell you this, if people will get down to talk, then they decide that all the Azimio members who are elected on Azimio platform will come back to their party, because William Ruto bought many of them, and they were compromised immediately he took oath of office, especially those from the northeastern part of Kenya. You've seen them interfering with the KANU and Jubilee and all at ODM. So if they resolve, and then the Azimio party gets back all its members, then it will mean that Azimio will become the party or a coalition with the majority members. Then the second thing will follow, that they must just decide to talk, among other things, how to expand the executive. Because I told you, whether you like it or not, we are in a crisis that is very political and social. As people talk about lowering the cost of living, people will also begin these talks by where did the rain start beating us? And the Azimio will insist on our votes were stolen. And then how do we resolve this? For each and every person, all these communities, to feel that they are part and parcel of the government, I can assure you that they might decide to accept expansion of the executive. So what does it mean? William Ruto is already the president, and you can take it to the bank. You might not like this, but it is not very easy for William Ruto to vacate office. Because I know Raila Odinga with all the sympathy that he has as a countryman. So what will happen is that they might create another office. They might go to the people to pass it through a referendum and pass the position of a prime minister. And then what does it mean? The party with the majority member of parliament will automatically donate a prime minister. And you know what that means to Musalia Mudavadi? He's really scared that he might lose that position. His popularity in Western Kenya, the entire Western Kenya, is really in limbo because he has tried much as he can, but Raila has a grip in that region. And this is really scaring him. You all know that Rigathi Gachagua would want and would welcome anything that will finish Musalia Mudavadi, because he's also very scared that Musalia could be a rival in 2027 running mate. And that's the reason why Musalia Mudavadi is really such a bitter man. But are we really in a crisis? I will tell you three things why we are in a crisis. And if Musalia Mudavadi is blind, then he needs to open up his eyes. One, we are in a crisis when a certain ethnic group is being targeted with bullets, being killed, and they are maimed. We are in a crisis when people go to the streets to lament about the high cost of living, something that Musalia Mudavadi and his team promised to work on, and then they are being killed. If that is not a crisis, then you will tell me. And then you will be very quick to answer me, because you have not lost a relative in the protest. You have not lost a brother, a sister, a daughter, a son, a mother, or a father. So you can open your mouth and start saying there is no crisis. But for those people who lost their lives or lost their loved ones, there is a crisis. If that is not a crisis, if loss of life is not a crisis to you, it is a crisis to many in this country. We are in a crisis when investors are fleeing our country. We need investors back to invest because we are suffering. There are no employments. When we have more investors, then they open more companies and then they invest with us. We will create job opportunities. But when they are running away to our neighboring countries, to an extent that others are bragging, you just saw the president of Tanzania, Madam Samia Suluhu, bragging that they have a lot of investors running away from Kenya courtesy of the volatile situation. That is a crisis. If it is not a crisis to you, then it means that you and all your relatives and friends can afford food on their table, can afford luxury, can take their children to the best schools, and can afford medication. To many of us, to many of Kenyans, this is, ladies and gentlemen, a crisis. We are in a crisis when our youths complete school, they graduate, but there are no job opportunities. We are in a crisis when parents cannot afford the cost of living, when parents cannot afford to pay school fees for their children. We are in a crisis when we see animals dying courtesy of the lack of rains and drought. We are in real crisis. Even the people who voted for William Ruto are now running in the streets saying, we want the cost of living to come down. We are in a crisis when all the institutions have been captured and they don't want to listen to Kenyans. Parliament has been captured. The judiciary has been captured. The bill that was taken to court by Okia Omutata, I can tell you it is a done deal because the courts will rule in favor of the executive. They have been captured. We are in a crisis. And Musalia Mudavadi should know that we are in a crisis because even themselves are not settled. This thing is really ruffling them. They're wondering what next when people sit down to talk, because they really want so much to guard their positions at the expense of the suffering Kenyans. Musalia Mudavadi can afford to put food on the table. Many Kenyans cannot. And so he should not tell us that there is no crisis. There is a lot of crisis. As the politicians look and guard for their positions, Kenyans must also get their fair share of this. Let me tell you, we will negotiate for the cost of living to come down, but we will also negotiate for positions. Those two must go together, whether you like it or not. And it is the reason why everyone in Kenya Kwanza is scared. And I don't know what to think, but that is my take.